Okay, seen so many videos of people sharing their XR650L builds and their opinion and everything on the XR. This is my second one. Technically, it shouldn't be my second one. It should be my first, but first one got stolen. So, thank you, Austin, Texas, for not having a police force. Anyway, I just want to share with you guys the little things that I did to it and talk about some of the obvious upgrades that this bike needs. Right off the bat, you'll notice that the left side of the engine looks pretty bare bones, as it should, because it doesn't have that bullshit exhaust gas recirculation system that ultimately limits your how well the engine performs, especially in the higher RPM range. So got rid of that, and as you can see, the shifter is aftermarket. That's due to a wipeout, so I just replaced it with a Tusk rather than a factory Honda one. It's kind of cool looking, adds a little flair. So actually did this upgrade yesterday. This new front tire, this is a Motage Tractionator Desert HT. So this tire actually felt a little bit squirrely on the highway. It is an R-rated tire, but I mean, you can tell by looking at it that it's very, very aggressive. So it kind of clobbers down the pavement. Hopefully, I'm hoping to get better performance out of it off-road than on-road. What else did we do? So we did the Yoshimura RS2 exhaust, which it's insanely loud, but it's pretty awesome, and it's good to be noticed by other drivers. And the D606 is a great tire. I just went with the wider one. So the stock is a 120 millimeter wide, and you can also get it in 130. So I got it in 130. If you do put a 130 on the back, you will have to cut your chain guard because the tread is so wide that the chain guard will they'll run into each other if you don't. There's so many other plans for this bike, and there's an infinite amount of things you can do to this bike. A lot of dudes they just take this whole thing off and they just put a tiny little tail light because they think that this is ugly. I really am not bothered by it, honestly. If anything, it's just a big functional square headlight. I like the sort of 1990s look to it. I also like this whole assembly because it ultimately just acts as sort of an extension to the mud flap, and it's functional, so I'm not gonna mess with it. But definitely, wife is planning to get me a seat concept seat for my B-day coming up, so that's gonna be a massive upgrade because this thing is honestly, like, if you're going any kind of a distance, this seat's like a 2x4. Without question, bars need to be adjusted. I mean, I'm 6'4", and this is, this is as high as I could adjust the bars, and I can't really stand comfortably and ergonomically. I'm still bent way too far over, so that's gonna need to change. But trying to think of anything else that I really did to this bike. We talked exhaust gas recirculation, we talked exhaust slip-on, the tire upgrades. Oh yeah, so a must on these bikes is, and you can't see what I'm talking about, but behind this cover is the countershaft sprocket. And when you're dealing with this bike, well, in stock form, I'm surprised Honda hasn't fixed it yet, but basically the countershaft sprocket that comes on here in stock form is way too narrow. Actually, I've got it right here. Look at all the stock parts come off this bike. So countershaft sprocket is way too narrow. So you want to use a wider one. There's a bunch of companies that make wider ones, but I went with JT sprockets and just put a wider one on there because this thing has no cush drive whatsoever. It's just engine to drivetrain, so there's a lot of vibrations, and the splines on your output shaft can get pretty worn down over time. I guess now seeing this stock air filter on the ground, we also did put a K&N air filter in here. The cool thing about the K&N air filter is that it is a little expensive up front. It's like 80 bucks, but it's also washable. So you basically just buy it and then you'll never have to buy another one. Also threw a K&N oil filter in there as well because you can't go wrong. And then I think the last thing that I've done to this is just put a brighter bulb. So I think I just got like an Amazon bulb. Claims 13,000 lumens. The one thing I will say about the LED versus the halogen is that the halogen kind of spreads and scatters the light better, whereas the LED strong suit is focusing the light. So if you're trying to see like a long distance and sort of penetrate the darkness, then you go with like an LED bulb. But if you're not looking for anything crazy and you like the way that the halogen bulb just kind of scatters the light better, there's nothing wrong with the halogen bulb. Honestly, I think the company called Jensen makes a whole different headlamp assembly that is LED that fits in this XR just fine, and I would imagine that one actually scatters the LED light just a lot better than this stock assembly. This is like a 1990s construction headlight. I mean, it's just so basic. So but yeah, so in terms of things I want to do to it, like we talked about the new seat. Wife always complains that the seat doesn't go far back enough, so once the seat concept seat goes on, it's not going to be any longer, but it will just be wider. But if I can fabricate something to make the seat a touch longer, that'd be really nice. And then there's a company, the name is escaping me right now, but there's a company that makes racks that I really want, that are going to be sort of side racks to accommodate panniers. And I would love to get some fabric panniers and load them up with tools like tire levers and even a jack or something like that, so that you can do side of the road repairs. Oh yeah, and then the other thing I did, which I don't necessarily recommend, is I changed this rear sprocket to the stock one is 45 teeth. The one that I put on is 42. So I basically just wanted this bike to be having some lower RPMs when you get up at the highway speeds, because I mean, ultimately this thing, it'll do highway speeds, but anything over 65 and it kind of starts to struggle, and you can tell it's just not. And then as a rider, the experience becomes very windy and not pleasant, but that was why I put the smaller rear sprocket on it to kind of change the final drive ratio. So far so good. I mean, I can still rip wheelies in first gear. Like, it hasn't really sacrificed too much bottom end torque, but it just kind of feels more stable at highway speeds just because it's not winding so high. But again, a lot of dudes, you are sacrificing some torque down low when you do that. So a lot of dudes would prefer to have the, the stock gearing. They prefer the shortness of it. But yeah, ultimately this bike is like, it's just bare bones. It's just 1992 technology. Honda's still making it for a reason. It's because it just works. It's reliable. So, if you're the kind of dude who's at least somewhat rough around the edges, and you can, you don't mind that this bike doesn't have, the fuel injection or the cush drive or some of those modern advances that you'll see on modern motorcycles, it still serves the purpose of a motorcycle. It's still, and it does it very reliably. So I highly recommend it.